Hi there, I'm Patsy Thompson and I'm going to show you just how easy it is to use a Sizzix machine to cut fabrics for quilting. This little machine has literally transformed my quilting life in ways I never could have imagined, so I want to show you just how easy it is to operate this small machine. Now this is the Sizzix Big Shot machine, and that's what I'll be demoing on today. Even though it's very sturdy, it only weighs 7 pounds 9 ounces, so it's very easy for me to pick it up and move it all around my sewing room if I need to. That really matters because space is at a premium in my sewing room, so I really love a product that I can easily move around if I need to free up some counter space for another project. When you bring your new machine home, you'll see just how easy it is to get going. There's only one adjustment you'll need to make, and that's to attach this handle to the machine. The tool to do it is included in the box, so after just a few turns of the hex wrench, your machine is ready to operate. Now also included with your machine will be a pair of cutting mats and a multi-purpose platform. You'll see later on how to use these. Let's talk for just a minute about cutting dies and how they work so the mechanics of this will make sense to you. What we're going to be doing today is cutting many applique shapes to make a fusible applique quilted wall hanging. So what we're going to do is use some applique cutting dies. Here's an example of an applique cutting die. You can see that there are 3 shapes on this die, 2 different sizes of petals and a flower center. What you can't see is that underneath this foam there is a very sharp steel rule that's bent into these 3 shapes, and when we move this die and fabric through the machine, the foam will be compressed such that the steel rule will contact the fabric and cut it. I think of this as if there are 3 cookie cutters attached to a wood base, and all of this is covered by foam. I can cut 6 layers of fabric or 6 layers of fabric bonded to paper-backed fusible web every time I send a die sandwich through this machine. That means I can cut an awful lot of applique shapes out with just a couple turns of a crank. Now that you know how the system works, let me show you my system for preparing fabrics to use in my Sizzix machine. I use Wonder Under fusible web, and this is a thin sheet of paper that has a very light sheet of glue bonded to one side of the paper. With my paper side up, I cut many strips of this fusible web, each strip being 6 inches thick. Now you're probably wondering why these are 6 inches thick, and that's because that's the width of the Sizzix Big Shot machine bed, so that means that's the absolute widest piece of fabric I'll be able to cut. Once I'm done cutting my fusible web, I cut my fabric selvage to selvage, but these strips are 6 1/4 to 6 1/2 inches wide, or just a little bit wider than my fusible web strips. The next step is merely to fuse the Wonder Under to the wrong side of the fabric. Notice that as I do this, I'm placing the glue side of the Wonder Under against the wrong side of the fabric. You can tell it's the glue side because it has a rougher texture than the paper side does. Now I do all of this in an assembly line fashion, and the whole process goes very fast. Notice that you want to leave the paper on the fusible web for the cutting phase, so don't remove it after fusing. We're just about ready to start cutting the fabric on the Sizzix machine, but let me show you my system for getting the most out of my fabric. It's all about taking just a second to quickly measure the size of the cutting die you're going to use. This is the die we'll be using, and you can see that this is to cut out flower shapes. If I just hold my ruler over the lines of the die, I see that I need fabric pieces that measure just a bit wider than 2 inches, so all I'm going to do now is cut my pre-fused fabrics into pieces that measure 6 inches by 2 inches. By working in this way, I'm going to minimize fabric waste. Before I began using a Sizzix machine, I was worried that this system might waste a lot of fabric, but I've worked out a system for myself that actually wastes less fabric than if I'd cut out all my applique shapes by hand. Even after I cut my shapes out of these small pieces, I'll be able to recut those scraps into other shapes with my Sizzix machine. All right, the moment of truth is here. We're going to cut these babies out on our Sizzix machine. I place the cutting die on a cutting mat, and then I layer my fabric on top of the die. Notice that I am orienting this fabric in a position that will give me unused fabric in as big a piece of scrap as possible. That's because I can reuse all the cast-off scrap fabrics that are created. I deliberately leave some excess fabric along all four sides of the shape I'll be cutting, but most of my excess fabric will be pooled on one side. As I add additional fabric layers, I place each one of them with the same care that I placed that very first layer, since I want to make sure fabric covers all parts of the steel rule shape. Once I've got my 6 layers of fabric on the die, I place the cutting mat on top, taking care not to alter the position of the fabric. I place the entire sandwich on the machine bed using the side that says Big Shot. I advance the die sandwich with one hand and make a couple of turns of the handle with the other hand, and my sandwich comes out the other side. It's that easy. I gently glide the top cutting mat off the sandwich, and I can now remove all my cut pieces. I can just keep going and going and going until I've cut as many pieces as I need. You can see how much time you can save working in this way, and the system also enables you to die cut many shapes that would be very difficult, if not completely impossible, to cut by hand. Let's watch this process again as I cut smaller sized petals to make the top layer of my flowers. I'm following the exact same process here, but I'm covering the smaller petal shape on the die. Again, all it takes is a couple of quick handle turns and I've got my new petals. Now, just in case you're not familiar with fusible applique, we're going to take just a minute to show you how easy it is to create beautiful flowers from all the lovely petals we've just cut. When I'm creating an applique shape that has multiple parts like this flower, I want to fuse all the pieces of this flower together into one unit before I even begin working on my wall hanging or quilt. To do this, I use a Teflon pressing sheet, and the exact sheet I'm using here is called the applique pressing sheet. This can withstand very high heat, and when I fuse all my flower petals together, they won't fuse to the pressing sheet. I simply remove the paper backing from the back side of the petals, and then I arrange them on the pressing sheet just as I want them arranged on my quilt top. I place my iron on top, and voila! These petals are now fused into a single unit. Once the pressing sheet has cooled, I can easily remove them, and you can see the shiny surface on the back side is the heat-activated glue that will later enable me to fuse this to the quilt itself. Very, very cool, but we're not done yet. This particular flower has 2 layers, and we've just created the bottom layer of petals. I do the same thing with the smaller petals, and now the top layer is 1. To complete my flower, I arrange my top layer on the bottom layer, then add my center motif, and once I gently touch an iron to it, I now have a complex flower that I can move around on my quilt top until I like its position. This saves me time since I won't be picking up and moving the 13 individual pieces that make up each flower. The next shape we'll be cutting is this lovely flourish. Now I ask you, would you even attempt to cut this out by hand? Absolutely not, and that's why you want to get yourself one of these Sizzix machines. This is a very intricate and delicate design that will really add a lot of sophistication to your quilt, so I'm expecting that these kinds of cutting machines will really revolutionize the kinds of designs we can make on our quilts. Now you can probably tell that I have fallen totally in love with that flourish shape, but there's something else that's really neat about that shape, and that's the fact that it can be used as a mirror image design element. Let's get back to the Sizzix machine and I'll show you how to cut mirror image designs really fast and really easily. This table runner needs 12 flourishes or 6 mirror image pairs of flourishes. I lay my fabric pieces on the die, again placing them to ensure that most of my unused space is on one side. Once I've placed my first 3 pieces in one orientation, I place my next 3 pieces so I've reversed which side of my fabric or fusible web paper faces up. In general, I try to have my paper layer be the topmost layer. I run my sandwich through the machine, and I have just now cut my first 3 pairs of mirror image flourishes. Before we remove our newly cut flourishes, I want to talk to you just briefly about a phenomenon in fabric cutting machines, and this can happen whether you're working on a Sizzix machine or an AccuQuilt machine. It's not a function of the machine. Sometimes a thread or two will not get cut, and this results what Kelly Jackson at I Have a Notion calls the hanging chad. Can you see that there are a few places where the threads are still connected? This used to drive me just nuts, but if you carefully snip these spots, you'll be okay. I've found that the more intricate a die you're using, the greater the likelihood of developing a hanging chad. But this is still so much easier and so much faster than ever trying to cut these shapes out by hand, so it's really a very small price to pay. And once you've gotten all your flourishes cut on your Sizzix machine, you'll simply arrange them on your quilt top, and then you're ready to fuse those babies down. Sizzix makes the cutting part so simple that you'll end up spending a lot more time arranging shapes and fusing them than you'll actually spend cutting them. Now I ask you, what could be simpler? Once those flourishes are done, you'll add in the flowers that we made earlier. You can see that I settled on the top flower layer that has a bit of pink, and I've also fused both layers of the flower and the flower centers together before I start placing them on the quilt top. This makes life much easier because you only pick up and move a single piece instead of 13 separate pieces as you're trying to arrange that top. Once it's all been fused, your wall hanger or table runner is ready to sandwich and quilt. Now you see what I mean when I say that this Sizzix machine allows me to create quilts that I could never create on my own. And here's the finished table runner. Didn't it turn out just great? What strikes me the most about this project is that the intricacy and delicacy of the applique shapes is really what creates all the interest here, and I never would have even tried to cut out something as intricate as those flourishes by hand. Thanks to my Sizzix machine, I can create all kinds of beautiful quilt projects literally with a few easy turns of a handle. So long for now, because I've got to get sizzling with my Sizzix machine.